Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Write an Adventure, our ongoing live stream where we are creating our very own custom campaign. So, today, as always, I'm RJ Kerr, your host, and today we are going to be jumping into working on some of the heist planning elements of the heist that we're writing for our Domain of Dread campaign here. But if this is your very first time joining us, let me go ahead and give you a quick sort of update on what we've done so far, so that you're not completely lost. So, we are creating a campaign from scratch, including a completely original Domain of Dread. We're making all of this as we go. We're doing this in real time so that you can see all the steps, the whole thought process, everything that goes into constructing a campaign like this using, my methodology and the way that I go about writing these things. There's of course no one right way to create campaigns, but this is my style. We've done a lot in this already. We have figured out how our adventurers are going to get into this domain of dread through a portal that opens up on the blood moon. We have talked about what might draw them through this portal, what sort of personal reasons might bring them into this domain of dread of their own free will. We have figured out where they land when they come in, a shanty town that we're calling Darkport that is set on the edge of an inland sea. We figured out that this inland sea is a huge part of the domain of dread and that it used to be the basin of a thriving metropolis like civilization that has now fallen into ruin and has become flooded. uh, Forcing the denizens of this domain up and around the basin of the sea. We've also know that it holds an elemental evil that we've named Ovander, and we're still fleshing out that entity and what they're all about. We have developed a couple factions for our characters to engage with, and we have created the very first adventure that will pull our characters into the story, in which they are briefly kidnapped and enslaved and have to escape their captors. And in doing so, they learn about the existence of a artifact of great power that gives the individual who wields it power over this domain of dread. And it becomes obvious that this is their best solution for escaping the domain with their lives. And so now we're working on a part of the adventure that is proactive, where the characters are free of their captors, they are armed with information, they can get out into the world and try to find this artifact for themselves, therefore giving themselves the power they need to escape alive. And so we are currently working on building out that portion where we're using what's called a node structure style here. The idea is that our characters are being proactive as part of this section. They're not responding to events, they're making things happen on their own, which is very cool. It gives a high level of player agency, but it also becomes somewhat difficult to write because you need a structure to write things in advance. And if you don't know what the players are going to do, it's hard to predict that. And so, what we're doing is we're creating a series of nodes that we also call investigative scenes that are populated with clues that the characters can find and follow, leading to other nodes that eventually leading to the solution of this mystery. Where is the artifact? So, we're building all of those out as we go now. We've already built one of them out in its entirety, a 5-room dungeon style adventure, very kind of classic design. And now we are building a heist style adventure, in which there are a multitude of shipwrecks that have been gathered around this natural stone arc, and then they've been deconstructed and repurposed into a castle-like structure, becoming a Sahuagin stronghold. And the characters have to break in to seek out an old ship's logbook that has the artifact's last known location in it. And so this is set up again as a heist style sort of adventure. And so we're using a modified 5-room dungeon methodology for this. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. We're calling this the Ghost Ship Castle Caper as kind of our working title. Maybe we'll call it something else later, but I've grown rather fond of that title, so we'll see. Um, And we've done a lot of work on this already. Like I said, we're using a modified five-room dungeon structure. And so what we've done is we've sort of set up a vibe. We've come up with a creature bank. We've given ourselves some stuff to kind of work with, some toys to play around with as we go. And then we've applied our structure, in which I would call this more the five scene dungeon because it follows the same sort of steps. However, you're kind of expanding our concept of it. They're not tied to any specific location, they're tied to events that occur as part of the adventure. Um, and so the first one is entry. And in this case, since it's a heist, that's the heist planning. This is where the characters gather information and they come up with their plan. How are they going to make this incursion into the stronghold? This is more proactive than just kind of charging in there, although they certainly have that option. But they're rewarded for doing some of this preliminary research with information that can give them some insight into what they're about to encounter. And the second part is your setback, right? In any five-room dungeon, you would have your setback. Well, in the five-scene dungeon, we have the same, only this is more about what happens when things go wrong, because they're going to go wrong. We just don't know when and where and how. And so what we've done is we've taken all of our encounters and we've put them into action groups. And these action groups are dynamic groups that move about the stronghold. And so this gives us a way to make the stronghold feel like it's alive, really, like people actually live here without using wandering monster tables or using random encounters. This gives us a population that's already dynamic and moves about the place, which means that there is a strong likelihood that at some point in the adventure, they are going to become alerted to the presence of these adventurers, meaning that they may know that there's intruders and go seek them out. And or they may even notice the intruders themselves and raise the alarm. And so we figured out what happens in those circumstances. How do these action groups go from being in one place to roaming? How do they go from roaming to be alerted to be on the lookout for intruders? How do they raise the alarm if they find the intruders? What happens when they raise the alarm? And then what happens if the characters themselves get captured? Because it's always a possibility in this situation. The third room of any five-room dungeon would be our puzzle, and in the five-scene methodology, I would almost reframe this as a challenge as opposed to a puzzle per se. Um, Although you can use whatever method, whatever term you like. And the idea in this is, there is a central challenge built into any heist, and that is getting the object you came there to get. Um, and so in this case, that challenge is finding that object. The characters are not likely to know exactly where it is. They are likely going to have to take their best guess and search around until they find it. Um, Although in some heists, you may have a style where they do know exactly what they're looking for. Now they just have to go in and find it. And so what we've done here is we've given ourselves a bunch of room descriptions populated with various toys and things for us as the DM to kind of feed our players as they go. We're still building some of this out in terms of some of the treasure that'll be here. We're working on some of the hazards and some of the traps that we'll encounter, that our characters will encounter as they sneak about this place. Um, but we're not worried too much about the encounters themselves because those are all still held up in this action group table. And we have listed what areas they start in. So we know how to populate this map initially. Uh, so from there, we worked on our climax. So in a five-room dungeon structure, you have the BBEG, and in the five-scene structure, really that becomes the climactic event. It's some way that the end of the adventure is more challenging than the beginning. Some final confrontation or challenge that must be overcome for the players to escape. And so in this case, we came up with the idea of perhaps a envoy from one of the other factions we've created, the Slotty-led faction, arrives at the stronghold, and they're there looking for the same thing that the characters are. That they're there looking for the ship's logbook because they too want to find the artifact. And so now we have created a situation where there's more eyes looking for them. There's the potential and the likelihood that there'll be discovery that the logbook is missing, and then the facility can go on active alert looking for someone who has stolen this logbook and making it more difficult for our characters to escape, adding some drama and tension to this. And then the last room or the last scene is our reward, and that's pretty straightforward. It's what is the information that is recorded within the ship's log? What does it give our characters that they didn't have before? Um, and so that's our final scene is that revelation that they're gonna of the information that they get if they succeed. So, with that summary in mind, we are going to go ahead and get back into working on some of the heist planning details. Heist planning is usually one of the things that I do last in when I'm writing heists because I want to know kind of the situation itself before I go into it. I want to know what the adventure is going to be about and what kind of information might be helpful to our characters before I start. It's kind of like planning a mystery or murder mystery. You want to have the murder in place first and know how it was committed so that you can figure out what the clues are that would lead to that eventually. So, before we jump into this, let me just do a quick reminder that this is an interactive live stream. So, as you have comments, questions, thoughts, ideas, anything you want to chat about, toss that in the chat. That's what it's there for. I love hearing from you all. You come up with some incredibly inventive ideas and thoughts, processes about what we can put into this adventure and to make it cool and unique and special. And I love hearing that from you all. So please feel free to hop in and give me your feedback and ideas as we move along. And of course, ask any questions you like as we go. Um, don't mind answering those at all, even if it sidetracks us a little bit. So, last time we were talking about what sorts of basic information that the characters might want or might be able to acquire before heading into a heist. And so we talked about things like we might come up with surveillance posts, places where the characters can go and sort of have a lookout and sort of scope out uh, the place that they're about to break into. These are usually static locations, and the challenge that's presented for the characters is that they're also usually known to whomever is, it populates this stronghold, right? So the Sahuagin would know about them. We came up with the idea of this ruined lighthouse that's up on the cliffs. And the characters could get in there, it gives them a good viewpoint, allows them to see the structure and really kind of check it out. They might be able to get more detail if they're savvy enough to bring things like a spyglass along with them or what have you. Um, but they can watch and get ships patrol or get sentry patrols and all that kind of stuff from this position and get a certain amount of information. But that they run the risk of being noticed because the Sahuagin know to check this place for spies. So that was one that we came up with. We also talked about scouting reports, which is sort of the dynamic counterpart to these surveillance posts, meaning that this is where the characters actually sneak up on the stronghold and scope it out. They do a lap around it, they do a flyby, something along those lines. And we came up with two ideas that would probably be the most common. Um, for any character to get involved in. Of course, there are fringe cases like sending your familiar or things like that to go check this out. But we figured that most characters would either have to approach the stronghold by boat or they'd have to go swimming around it. And that we decided that the players would likely be smart enough for their characters to wait and do this after dark. So we're assuming that they're coming in after dark when they've got a little bit of cover to check this out and creating some skill challenges to make it a little more dynamic. Looks like we've got another comment already. Let's see here. Roped Goat says, heists, dig it. I recently ran one for a group with no stealth or finesse characters. I did find a way to make that work, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you would handle this situation. Yeah, that's a really great question, Rope Goat. You want to be able to adapt characters to or adapt adventures to any character. Um, and that means that you could, run this sort of situation where you don't have anybody who's really a stealthy sort of individual, or even if you've got one, good stealther, one rogue who's got a high stealth or something along those lines in the party, the majority of them might not be. And so the solution isn't always to do things like group stealth checks or something along the line, although you certainly could and make it a team effort and do group checks so that non-stealthy characters can be outweighed by stealthy characters, or balanced out, I should say, by stealthy characters. The alternative is to make a situation where um, stealth really isn't as important. Where we talk a lot about sneaking around in D&D, and the default is to say that it's a stealth check, but you could also run it in such that it's just good planning. Um, it could be as simple as scoping out, hallways before you move down them. It could be disguises. It could be all sorts of ways to kind of go about that. And so you could make it performance checks instead of stealth checks. You could make it intimidation checks instead of stealth checks. You know, you could not make any checks at all and just have it such that if the characters are quick enough uh, to avoid going down hallways that have sentries actively walking down them, or quick enough to move past doors before they're opened up, then that works entirely too. Um, I could see a situation where you could turn it, instead of stealth checks, into um, a series of saves. You could set it up so that uh, you know as the characters are moving cautiously through this stronghold, if they come to a corridor and they notice that there is somebody down on the sentries down on the other end, that you make a dex save to see if they can get out of sight fast enough, or an athletics check to see if they can if they're if they can move fast enough to kind of get out of sight before they're noticed. You could even go another route and make that a perception check instead. That the test is to see if they notice the opposition, as opposed to being extra stealthy themselves, that they're just observant enough to know when they need to not be in a particular place to not be seen. So, really, the short answer to what you're asking here is, while I would usually write something along these lines using sort of our default assumptions, just because it's a little bit easier and we can balance it and assume a balanced group when we kind of do this. If I'm writing it for a group of characters that I know, and I know that stealth is going to, for example, be a weak point for them, I would come up with other checks that can be made that are less of a weak point, um, so that there's more likelihood of success. What I wouldn't do, what I'd want to make sure I really strayed away from, was creating a situation where it was just a series of stealth checks over and over again. Because no matter how good the characters are, they're going to fail one eventually. And we don't want to set them up for success. We want to set them up for success, not set them up for failure. We want them to have a good time in the adventure. Which is not to say that you shouldn't use stealth checks if you have characters who aren't very good at them. Just be sparing with it, would be my advice. Trying to lean into your character's strengths as opposed to leaning into their weaknesses. But every once in a while, it's fun to remind them that they have those weaknesses, and that seeing how they handle that and being open to creative solutions to kind of get around those ideas. I hope that answers your question. And Yeah, so unless there's any others before we start, let's go ahead and get into our our scouting reports. Let's figure out our challenge, our skill challenge that we're working on. So um, the so we came up with two approaches here. We came up with by boat and swimming, and so this was at the very end of our last session here. So we just kind of jotted down a couple quick notes to ourselves, and we really need to flesh this out. Something just to kind of keep us in mind here is we're going to say that we're going to run this encounter as a skill challenge in which the characters must succeed 4 checks before they fail 3. Um, and that's just to kind of remind ourselves how we're getting this, how we're kind of getting this set up here. Um, so we've got 4 skills uh, that we want to run, and we can do this. There's a number of ways that you could do this. We could run this as a series of skill checks, in which they've got to succeed each one 4 times or 3 times or what have you, before they before they fail 3. And personally, I wouldn't run it that way. I think it just becomes a slog if it's just this set of like we're just constantly making skill checks and did I pass? Did I fail? Instead, what I would do when I run this is I would have these each be a skill check that we need to succeed at. Um, and uh, and that we're succeeding. We've got to succeed at each one of these before we fail 3 times at any one of them, right? On any of them here. So I just think that that makes a better narrative story when I kind of run this, and that's something to keep in mind when you're writing these adventures is kind of how you're going to tell it, because at the end of the day, your players are not going to see your notes. They're not going to see what you've written down here. It's all going to matter how you present it to them. Um, and so thinking a little bit of that as you write it is worthwhile. So for example, when I'm running this sort of encounter, I would think of this as this is the story of them casing the joint. So if they're by the boat, so if they're going by boat, I would say that there are reefs and rocks and that sort of thing, and they're out at night and they got to avoid some of that stuff. And so first, I'm going to ask for the survival check. And if they succeed, then awesome. We're going to move on to them moving up stealthily through the water and being quiet as they go. Maybe they've padded their oars or what have you. But if they fail that first survival check, I'm going to say, oh, you come up you run aground on a rock as you're approaching it. A rock that you didn't see just under the water there, and now you've got to get off of it. Um, and and I would count that as a failure, right? But I would have them make either that survival check again or another relevant check. Like if somebody was like, I want to use my water vehicles skill. I'm proficient in water vehicles. I want to use that to handle and kind of get the boat off that. I'd allow them to make that check and move on. And so the idea being that they succeed the hazard navigation. And then move on to our sentry avoidance, and then on to our observation, and then on to our occurrence, where we have them repeat a check if they fail, but if they succeed, they move on. Rope Goat says failing forward, and that's exactly it. We're failing forward as we do this. We're keeping the story moving. Now, I would also narrate the failures in a way that reminds them that there are stakes, that they're not just making these rolls again and again and again, that there are stakes if they fail. So for example, for the first failure, I might mention like, you're stuck on the rocks, you're trying to get off, you look up and you can see sentries with lights sweeping the water, moving along the battlements. You're not noticed yet, but you could be at any moment, and putting that sort of time pressure on there, so that they know that now there's a change in the situation and there's something that's more difficult that they're going to have to deal with now, and really kind of as I'm writing this, coming up with how I want to run this, how do I envision it. I think that that's the way to write skill checks, or skill challenges, I should say, because otherwise it's just math rocks is all it is. We're going to play with math rocks, and we're going to get a thumbs up or a thumbs down. We really want to turn it into a story. So um, let's go ahead and flesh this out a little bit so that we have some notes to ourselves, so that when we go and we decide we want to run this, we remember what it is that we came up with while we were working on it. So we said hazard navigation, so survival check. We're going to want to know the DC of this kind of stuff. I don't usually make the DCs terribly high for skill challenges, like a DC 12 or something along those lines for a lot of this kind of stuff. But you can make it more difficult or easier depending on what you want to do. Just bearing in mind that the more dice they have to roll, the more likely they are to fail. And so a low DC doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. It just means that there's less surety a failure. So hazard navigation, we're going to say um, rocks and reefs surround stronghold. One character must make a DC 12 wisdom survival check. Survival check in order to avoid floundering on the rocks. Oh, well. Cool. Simple as that. Put something along those lines down there just to kind of give myself a reminder. And I would mention to you that the way that I do this sort of thing too is I give myself a skill that I imagine somebody using for this, but I don't usually hold it sacrosanct. If a player can give me a good reason why they should be able to use a different skill for this particular challenge, then awesome. Good for them. I let them use it. But this is really just kind of so that I don't end up in a situation where I go, oh, that would be what skill would that be again? I'm really kind of giving myself just a little bit of a primer here, a default to go to. All right, so sentry avoidance. The idea being that sentries patrol the battlements and guard posts of the stronghold, watching the water for intruders. One character must make a DC 12 dexterity stealth check to keep the boat hidden while it approaches stronghold. Simple as that. And generally on a skill challenge, it's not everybody making the check. I usually have one person do it and have their justification for why that person is doing it. Maybe they're the person at the oars, maybe they're the person who is at the bow navigating. Maybe they're the one steering at the rudder or something along those lines. But I'll let the characters kind of come up with that and remind them of that when they're giving me their marching order within the boat with who's doing what. All right, observation. Let's see here. The characters must succeed a DC 12 wisdom perception check in order to spot, in order to notice alternate entrances and patrol patterns as they circle the stronghold. Okay, and so in this one I said the characters. So for something as important as the observation, I might let everybody kind of take a look at it, or a couple people take a look at it, especially if not everybody's done something else as part of this. Because you might end up in a situation where one person is kind of rowing and steering and doing all that kind of stuff at the same time. Um, and you want to make sure that everybody has something to do as part of this process, or else there was no reason for everybody to go along. Let's see. We got another comment. Ripko, would you allow something like using a spell slot to cast silence to count as a success? Yeah, absolutely. It's a creative solution to the problem there. Now, you're well within your rights to go. Well, a silence spell only covers a certain area, so yeah, it might be a success if they stay within that area. Um, but you know, but if the characters are thinking outside the box and trying to use the other tools that they have available to themselves, then I'd say, yeah, let them do it. Let it move the story forward. Or the option there too is that you might end up in a point where they're about to fail and get noticed, or they think they're about to fail and get noticed, and they want to do a Hail Mary with a spell slot or one of their class features, and really try to turn that failure into a success. Again, I would usually let them make the attempt because it's just interesting. It adds more, it adds a more narrative flair to the story, and it keeps everybody kind of on their toes and holding their breath. Um, so yeah, whatever keeps the tension up as you kind of go along here, and gets your characters, it gets your players excited about what they're doing, is, I mean, ultimately a win. That's the goal. Is everybody's going to have fun, right? So if it adds to the fun, yeah, I'd say go for it. Use those creative solutions. Um, so, um, Rope Goat says, I usually allow these as long as it's flavorful, but also helps if it burns a resource. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with wanting it to burn a resource or take care, or give them a cost in some way, especially if they're turning a failure into a success or they're getting an automatic success. Have it use up some of the resources. Nothing wrong with that. It's a good way to approach it. The flavorful thing I agree with is 100% something that I would require, because again, we don't want this to turn into just a series of bland, checks that have no heart or feeling to them. We want this to be part of a story, and so if it builds on the story and it creates tension and it develops some excitement as the story progresses, then that's usually my guiding light. Is if it's going to be more fun to let them use an original solution than it is to stymie that, then I let them do it. If that solution is just going to put them in a place where they can kind of ignore this as a challenge, then maybe I wouldn't, because that eliminates the purpose of this, as to create some narrative tension. Um, so I wouldn't end up in a situation where they have um, where they can sort of just bypass this for nothing. I'd had let them bypass elements of it, and with some out of the box thinking, and still require either a check of some kind or require them to burn a resource of something. But there wouldn't be a thing that I allow them to do that just negates this entirely. For example, if for some reason, and they probably wouldn't at this level, but let's say that they did, let's say they got a hold of a teleportation scroll or something along those lines, or some way to just kind of teleport in and check out the uh, you know the into the stronghold and sneak about. Well, great, I'd let them do that, but I would modify this challenge such that now they're sneaking through the stronghold, and now they got to make these checks to avoid getting seen and spotted before they can escape, versus just saying, well, you pop in, you see what you need to see, and then you leave, and it's no big deal. Same thing kind of goes for things like familiars, right? Because you almost know that you're going to end up in a situation where the you're going to have the wizard who goes, "Well, I just send my familiar to fly by at night and see what he can see," and that's great. I'd let them do that 100%. But remember that even like a bird who's circling, it might be innocuous at first, but that bird's behavior can become suspicious. And in a world where familiars exist and polymorph is a thing, it would not be out of pocket for sentries to become suspicious of animals that are too close or too inquisitive. Um, And so I would just make this a series of checks now that the familiar has to make, and challenges that they have to overcome. Or there might be things that they just can't notice. So, for example, if they're flying by, they can only see things that are above the surface of the water. And now this stronghold has got a significant portion of it that's below water. Um, Things that you can see that if you're on the water, absolutely. But if you're too high above, you might not be able to spot those things. And so they might be able to circumvent some of the checks in that case, but they wouldn't get all of the benefit of this scouting report. There would be things that would be missed in that scenario. Um, so we're just giving ourselves some of the most likely options here, and things that we can kind of imagine right out of the gate that our characters are going to engage with or potentially try. And we're putting these in here not because this is like the only way that they can succeed, but again, giving ourselves some tools to kind of play with and work with when our players inevitably come up with a strategy that we never imagined. So we're not having to draw completely from scratch. We've got something that we can pull from to make it a little more seamless. Um, all right, so let's go ahead and knock out the last bit here by boat, and then we'll work on swimming if that works for everybody. Um, and if we really want to see kind of what I would do for familiars or something like that, I can add flyby to this and kind of talk about that too. So let me know if that's something you'd like me to see, if that's something you would like to see me do on here. So currents, let's say strong currents. Um, Actually, we'll say the waters around the stronghold are famous for their strong currents. Um, Characters at the oars must succeed a DC 12 strength athletics check or wisdom water vehicles check to either fight or avoid the strongest currents. And so in this case, there are two checks that I could see the characters might wanting to make, and I'm guessing that wisdom, my thought process of avoiding the current would be more of an observation sort of thing. So it'd be a wisdom kind of check, I would imagine, and then if you're proficient in water vehicles, you'd add your proficiency bonus to it, that kind of deal. But again, there's alternate ways that we could do this, and that your players probably will want to do this, and there's nothing wrong with flexing on that a little bit here. Again, these are just kind of ideas to give yourself so that you're not floundering in the moment, not to hold as rigid and fast rules necessarily. Cool. All right, so we are a little over our halfway point, and this is the part in our episode where I usually do a shameless self plug, and today's no different. I'm going to do a quick one here. Um, so I am not just a guy on the internet who tells you how to write adventures. I am actually also a professional DM, and I am constantly running games on startplaying.games/GM/RJ Kerr, where you can join into any number of my campaigns. I've got several campaigns already populated that are looking for characters. Some that are already started, some that are looking to start. Um, I've got one shots that pop up here on a regular basis. Those are a great way to hop in and see if I actually know what I'm doing. The one shots are adventures that I've personally written. And so, for example, Hag Heist is a popular one that I run from time to time. and it's another high style adventure that I wrote using the same sort of methodology that I'm going over here. And so it's a cool way to hop in, play a game, see if I actually know my stuff, and if the way that I write and run things like heists makes sense to you. Um, so I would love to see any of you in one of my tables, but I encourage you to come and check out this page. You can find all my games here. You can find kind of my little dissertation on my GM style and about me as a writer, and then of course see all my reviews of what other players who have played with me think. With that, I run games almost every day of the week, and I'm more than happy to run either custom campaigns or custom one shots at custom times. You just got to let me know and do this request booking function. So, if you're a GM that is looking to get some time as a player, or you're a player looking for a new table, come and check me out. Again, that is startplaying.games/GM/RJ Kerr. You can also follow the link in the description to this video. And with that, that's the end of my shameless self plug. So let's go ahead and get back to our adventure. So we have swimming, and this could be very similar to by boat. There would be nothing wrong with it if we decided that we wanted to um, pretty much make this, the same thing, whether it's by boat or you go by swimming, and the only difference is that it's an athletics check versus a water vehicles check or what have you as you go. The only thing that I would mention is that things like hazard navigation might not make as much sense if we're swimming. Not because you don't have to avoid those things, but because it's a lot easier to get yourself off the rocks than it is to push a rowboat off the rocks or something along those lines. We also might, if we were going to narrate that you kind of get thrown against the rocks, we might want to incorporate some damage in that if the characters are swimming. We could incorporate damage for the boat too. There's nothing wrong with that. It just I think it doesn't necessarily add anything to have the potential of damaging the boat in a way that would keep it from functioning. Although you could certainly narrate that in to increase the tension if they fail this roll a couple times, something along those lines. So let's think about what we want on this. They need the observation. I think that makes a lot of sense. They should have to make that check. The sentry avoidance, we could keep in there as well. The currents make sense with the athletics check having to kind of overcome those. So that's simple. We can repurpose those. But let's find something other than hazard navigation for swimming. What's something else that the characters might have to avoid? And these waters are rife with life. Something that comes to mind would be have to avoid a hazard like the might have to like jellyfish or something along those lines that might be in the water. It might be that might be a hazard they're trying to avoid. Something along those lines. And then instead of damage, maybe there's a condition. Maybe they get poisoned if they fail that check. And maybe instead of getting noticed, the risk of getting noticed, they increases just the difficulty of them completing the rest increases. That's a way that we could go on that. Let's see what else. We've got a couple comments here. We see Ben Elder says potentially losing items if failing a swim check. Maybe having to drop a weapon to swim better. Yeah, that's a possibility. I normally don't try to strip gear from characters, but in a situation like this where they've got time to plan and correct for that, and now they kind of have to lose that resource, might it could be interesting. Are you imagining that they're doing because this is still a skill check, right? So are you imagining that they're having to do kind of an initial swim check? And they've got to, and if they fail that, then they've got to drop some because they're overweighted. Is that kind of what you're getting at here? Roped Goat also says fails might damage the boat. 3 hits sinks the boat, or you get noticed. Yeah, I would go with the well. I was gonna say I would go with the "you get noticed" bit there, but, it could be just as narratively interesting that you sink the boat and you don't get noticed, but now you don't have a boat, and now you've gotta swim back to shore, or something along those lines, and that, the possibility of that shipwreck being on there could alert the zoo again the following day or something along those lines. Yeah, you can do it either way. You can really narrate failure any way that you want, um, and so long as it creates an interesting situation. The advantage to getting noticed, I think, with failure for the skill check here has is more of that. Now it might create a chase sequence. So now the character's got to get out of there before the Sahui can catch up to them, um, which could precipitate a battle, or it might not. It might dodge their pursuers, but it creates this sort of you know kind of abort kind of situation where it's a like now we really need to get out of here. It's not just we need to slink off with our tail between our legs. Um, so um, let's let's reorder some of this to start. Let's start with currents, and let's say um, yeah, and we're gonna get rid of the water vehicles check. Um, or we can always make this a survival check too. We could say something along those lines to avoid the strongest currents, to avoid a riptide or something along those lines. Um, but this works just as well for the two. So there's no reason that we don't need to. There's no reason not to repurpose it and add it to the swim check there. And it makes sense to start with it because they've got to get into the water from the shore and get going. Let's see here. Ben Elder says maybe if they get caught in the currents, maybe give dropping gear as an option or taking a level of exhaustion. Um, yeah, that's something that we can absolutely do. As opposed to the splashing being noticed or something along those lines. Um, you know, um, there's two there's two sides to this when it comes to things like exhaustion. Um, and maybe exhaustion is the answer to this skill challenge, right? It may change it if it's swimming. If we make exhaustion the case as they're swimming, um, but we could. But here's kind of the pros and cons of exhaustion for an encounter like this. Every time they take a level of exhaustion, it means that under the new rules, there's going to subtract two from from their skill check as they go forward. So it's going to make so each level of exhaustion is going to make each check more difficult, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something to be aware of. It's also going to reduce their speed. And so we could change this a little bit such that, and there's nothing wrong with doing this. In fact, it could be fun to kind of flip the script a little bit here and make the boat a proper, traditional skill challenge, and make swimming something that's a little more modified, where we're using the exhaustion as failure. Because what could happen is that it could be that they need to succeed these four checks before they get their six levels of exhaustion, I think it is, uh, and die. That could make sense. They could be fighting out in the water there, swimming around, and they get too tired and they can't swim back and they just drown. So this could make swimming out there somewhat lethal. Um, the Which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something to be aware of. Is that you could end up in a situation where their heist planning ends up getting somebody killed, but not a that's not necessarily again not necessarily a bad thing. That's just one other way to handle the storytelling, and it certainly raises the stakes and encourages characters who perhaps don't have a swimming speed or something along those lines to go take safer routes first. Um, maybe they only decide to swim in after they fail checking out by boat or something along those lines. Um, Not a bad plan. In fact, I'm kind of tempted to do that just so that we can have some variation between these two. So they're not just sort of equivalent situations that are almost entirely the same, that there's a little bit of difference there. One of them is far more dangerous. Before we jump into that, though, let's see here. Ben Elder says maybe a survival slash animal handling check to avoid attracting sharks and sea snakes. Yeah. Yeah. I think I like that as one of our hazards. I really do. I think it kind of leads into the fear of we're in the water with whatever's out here too, and that's something that can narratively could be a very cool thing. But let's do this. Let's say that the boat is a traditional skill check, and swimming, that's an endurance thing. So we can say that um, we say each time a character fails one of the following checks, they receive a level of exhaustion. Did I not spell that right? I did not spell that right. Exhaustion. Come on. They receive a level of exhaustion. Any characters who receive 6 levels of exhaustion drown and die. All levels of exhaustion are lost during a short rest on land. We need to adjust this so it just says characters must succeed. Cool. Rope Goat says, "Oop, gotta run. Y'all have fun. Good show. Thank you so much for joining us, Rope Goat. Good to have you here. Good to see you again." All right. So, let's see here. In our last few minutes, let's go ahead and finish out the swimming one here. I like the idea of using the exhaustion for it, just to make it a little bit different, to raise the stakes a little bit. And in this case, I would have every character make every check. So every character that's swimming out has to make these swimming checks. Whereas in the boat, they're working as a team. And so one person is making each check, is making, one person per check in the boat. But swimming, since they're all kind of having to struggle physically through that situation, I'd have everybody make the checks. But we've got currents to start. Let's say Sentry Avoidance is next. And let's see here. Control the. Just change this to characters. Must make to stay hidden while they approach stronghold. Easy enough. And observation, our third one here. And I think that one's written just fine. We don't need to make any adjustments to that. And then the last one, I think we're going to go with Ben Elder's suggestion here, and we're going to have an animal handling check to avoid getting, perhaps provoking an attack from some sea life that moves into the area while they're swimming around. So we're going to say sea life hazard, and we'll say dangerous sea life Let's see here. A dangerous sea life lives, let's see, populates the water around the stronghold. Characters must make a DC 12 wisdom animal handling check to avoid encountering dangerous sea life, such as jellyfish or sea snakes. Yeah, and because again, I wouldn't use sharks for this because I think that you'd end up with a kind of a bite attack situation, and I'm really trying to avoid causing damage to the characters in these instances here because I don't want to provoke a battle per se. That's just kind of narratively not what I want at this part of the adventure. Doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with having a battle at this point. We've just got so many opportunities for other battles, and we want to reward the characters for avoiding combat. And we've got other tools at our disposal. They don't often have to worry about getting so much exhaustion that it might kill them. So I would pick something that I might be able to skin as causing exhaustion, like jellyfish really comes to mind, is the one. Okay, so we got one more comment. Let's hear from Ben Elder. Could walking underwater be an option? Picturing a sea elf paladin walking on the seabed and climbing underwater cliffs. Yeah, absolutely, it could. It would be one of those fringe case things, though, right? Because how many parties have a sea elf in them? We there might be. We probably have more likelihood for there to be a party that has a sea elf in it, considering this domain of dread. But again, that's sort of a fringe case kind of thing. And so I would have them run that as either kind of a by boat or swimming sort of base, meaning it's a skill challenge or it's an exhaustion challenge, an endurance challenge, and see how that shakes out. I would just kind of reskin it in gameplay. But yeah, I could see that as a solution. I could also see somebody trying to pull the Pirates of the Caribbean thing, right, where they take the rowboat and they turn it upside down and they submerge with it and they go walking underwater with it with this bubble of air around them. That comes back to creative solutions to this kind of thing. I would let characters try to do stuff like that. But I would still require them to make checks. I would just change what kind of checks those were using these as a guide. Okie dokie. We've had a rollicking discussion this evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being so active in the chat. I think it's time, though, for us to go ahead and put a pin in our adventure writing this evening, since we've already spent a good hour doing it. And we will jump back into this on Wednesday. So if you have enjoyed this stream, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. All that kind of stuff helps the channel grow. If you want to jump into one of my games, come find me at startplaying.games/gm/RJ Kerr. You can find that link in the description of that video as well. And jump into one of my tables. Like I said, I've got some ongoing campaigns that still have space for new players. We've got some ones that are looking to start that are recruiting new players. For example, in every other Saturday game of Tomb of Annihilation on there. And of course, there's always the option for custom games. Just request a booking. Thank you again. And if you happen to be in the Huntsville, Alabama area this weekend, I will be DMing my Hag Heist adventure at the Huntsville Comic and Pop Culture Expo, the 25th, 26th, and 27th of April. So if you're there, if you're one of the folks who's coming to town for that, come check me out. I'd love to play a game with you. All right. Well, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time. Chat with you on Wednesday. Bye now.